Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining me as we spend the next hour together. And I do sincerely hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. Coming up tonight, we'll break down the presidential election and we'll discuss what unfolded last night during the presidential debate. But first, my opening observations. In 2004, I recall going to Boston to report on the Democratic convention, and a young Barack Obama stood to the podium. He was running for Senate back then, and he stated this: there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a Black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America. He was right, and he created a lot of hope and change back then, because on the surface, he let people know that we are all Americans. Yet fast forward to today, and it's clear to see that somehow we've lost our way in having a United States of America when we're divided on racial and political lines. So much so that it has even gone into the final presidential debate. When asked the question about race in America and racism in America, here is how the candidates responded.
I am the least racist person. I can't even see the audience because it's so dark, but I don't care who's in the audience. I'm the least racist person in this room.
The fact of the matter is, there is institutional racism in America. And we have always said, we've never lived up to it, that we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women are created equal. Well, guess what? We have never, ever lived up to it, but we've always constantly been moving the needle further and further to inclusion, not exclusion.
The president even repeated his campaign stump last night, the talking points from that, stating that he is the best president since Abraham Lincoln to do more for Black people in America. What do you think about that? And then there's Joe Biden, who says he knows the plight of Black Americans, and if elected president, he will do more to end what he calls systemic racism. Again, I ask you, what do you think about that? And what you think really matters and makes a difference when you go to the polls and vote. So whatever you do and whatever you think, just be sure you act on it and vote. And those are my opening observations. So the last and final presidential debate of the season took place last night, and today people are still talking about it, about the two candidates, Joe Biden, of course, the vice president who's running for the presidency, and then, of course, President Donald Trump. Joining me now to talk about this and how it affects Black America is Dr. Benjamin Chavis, who is the president of the NNPA, National Newspaper Publishers Association, and the Black Press USA. Good of you to join us today, my friend. How are you?
Thank you, Kelly. It's always good to be on the Black News Channel and on the Kelly Wright Show. And I would say it was the first debate, because I think last night
was a good
was
point.
a real
That's a
debate.
very good point. The first an actual debate.
Last night, was interesting, but I thought the moderator did an excellent job, and I thought that the election commission changing the rules by saying that, okay, if you go overtime, your mic will be cut off. So I think it made both candidates respected the rules more. And I think each candidate got a chance to make their points. That's why I would say it was the first presidential debate, even though it's the last. Just in terms of format, it went well. And I think the American public will be able to make clear choices from what they heard.
So you're right. You lay it all out in terms of what's coming up for the coming days between now and the presidential election. But let's go to the moderator, Kristen Welker. She
Yes.
did something that to date no moderator has been able to do with President Donald Trump, and that's keep him under control, if you will, if you can do that, and have a substantive debate.
Absolutely. If people have asked me, well, who won the debate? And I'm saying the moderator won the debate. Kristen Welker won the debate because of her skill, her intelligence, her preparation. Obviously, she was well prepared, and she was able to handle a situation, not only handle it, but coordinated in a way where the American public benefited from it. And while I've just parenthetically state for the record, Kelly, this is why diversity and inclusion matters in television. This is why having African Americans, Latinos, and other people of color in major positions in broadcast television, to be anchors of the programs, to be coordinators, we need more diversity and inclusion. So I think America last night also saw the future of how programming, television programming, and news production, news broadcasting needs to be much more diverse and much more inclusive.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And again, kudos to Christian Welker and actually stepping out there in a major, major role to do a major job and do it well. Thank you, Dr. Benjamin Chavis of the NNPA Black Press USA. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
So for those of you who were watching the debate last night, you probably have your own opinions, and 40 million people have already gone to the polls to vote. So a lot of people have decided. But for those undecided voters, who really won last night's debate and attracted them to themselves? And of course, one of the most important voting blocks that people have been talking about is the voting block of Black women. So joining me now are two astute political analysts who are wonderful, talented, brilliant Black women. We have Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver and Erica Savage Wilson. It's good of you to join me today. How did you perceive last night's debate from a standpoint of eyeing this election and what it means to you and your significant voting block? Dr. Avis, we'll begin with you.
Sure. So for me, last night was just the closing arguments. It really showed exactly these two men and who they were to their core, in addition to policy issues, but it was specifically just to me, really drilled down on who they were. Who understands the priorities that we are facing right now in this nation, who has a plan for actually dealing with those challenges that we're facing, and who is stuck in a rut of, telling grand conspiracy theories and deflecting questions. At this point, Black women, we are very practical voters. We take our responsibilities to our families and our communities very seriously. And so for me, in terms of looking at that debate, the choice was very clear. There's only one man on that debate stage that to me would look like a president, and that was Vice President Biden.
Erica, did President Trump have any appeal to you at all, or was it all Joe Biden?
Oh, he never has. And so that was an easy box for me to check. And I agree with Dr. Avis. I said that on my morning broadcast, the Savage Political Bite this morning. This was, in fact, the closing argument. And when we're thinking about those voters, because I tend to say that they're not necessarily undecided voters, but they're voters that have to be moved from the couch to action. When you're thinking about the succinctness, when you're thinking about the clarity with which former Vice President Biden delivered his message, and again, speaking directly to the camera, talking to American families, saying that he absolutely connects and that he understands. Just briefly, the mention around the talk and saying that, he has a daughter that works in a field where she does have communication with the American public, and having an understanding that he didn't have to raise his children in a way where he had to sit them down and talk with them about the violence that they may encounter just because of the color of their skin, to talk very clearly about climate and how it not only impacts the Black community, but then people who are living in rural industrial communities that aren't necessarily connected to a metropolis city, understanding that the EPA rolled back waivers back in March of 2020, that for folks that are living in communities where there are pollutants that are continuously, that they're in proximity to, that they were even being polluted with a pandemic, the virus being a respiratory virus. And so to say to people all throughout the United States that, listen, I understand that 220,000 of you all have passed away, but that with the plan that me and Madam Vice President have, that we're going to make sure that contact tracing is in place, that we're going to make sure that there's rapid testing available, laying out very clearly, these are the things that are priorities to me within the first 100 days, and putting to bed kind of the childish and toddler behavior, the combativeness that we've seen out of this occupant of the White House, I think would help those people who are registered, who not yet have made it off the couch, really take that leap of faith in some of this good weather, go ahead and cast a vote for former Vice President Biden and Senator Kamala Harris.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue my discussion with Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver and Erica Savage-Wilson. We'll talk about where things now stand, just 11 days away from Election Day, and some of the issues that are important to Black women and how they're going to help compel Black men to get out the vote. That's next. Welcome back to the program. I'm talking to Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver and Erica Savage-Wilson. They're both political analysts and commentators and very astute in their analysis of what's going on politically. Dr. Avis, you were part of a Black Women's Roundtable with Essence Magazine. You compiled a lot of information. You've discussed it on this program. Erica, you're quite familiar with that Black Women's Roundtable discussion. The one thing that came out that was top of mind to me was the racial concerns that Black women have about moving this country forward. That question was raised last night by a very competent moderator, Kristen Welker, on the race issue. We've talked about in the previous segment, but how important is this to Black women in terms of what's happening for racial justice in this country?
I mean, it cannot be overstated how important this is to Black women. This is one of the key, in many instances, the top key issue that is driving Black women to the polls. The survey that the Black Women's Roundtable did in conjunction with Essence Magazine saw over and over again and across all different generations of Black women that the issue they felt was most important in terms of impacting their lives, their families' lives, and their entire community was this issue of the rise in hate crimes and racism in America. And we know that right now, under this administration, we have risen historic heights in terms of the number of hate groups in America. We also have had a spike in hate crimes in America. So Black women understand this to be what it is. It is a threat to our very lives in this nation. And to have one person on the political aisle yesterday who, when asked directly about race and if he understands what it's like for Black parents to have this talk, in essence, that question was about, do you understand about the very real mortal threats that Black people face in navigating this society? One candidate answered that question in detail. He clearly understands, he clearly also admits that his whiteness has afforded him the privilege of not having to have that type of talk with his children. The other one deflects. And once again, just completely goes back to a checklist of things like, okay, aren't y'all happy now? I'm the next Abe Lincoln. No, you're not, boo. So, it's very clear to Black women who is threatening the lives of ourselves, our children, our families, and our community. And that's why we are turning out in droves right now, and also all the way up to and including Election Day to drive him out of office.
There are some Black conservatives who say that this president has done great work. As the president, as Avis was alluding to, the president rolling off a TikTok, if you will, of all the things that he's done, HBCUs, criminal justice reform, and other matters. But if you drill right down into that, there are some Black conservatives who are applauding that, Black and white conservatives. What do you say to them? Because you speak from a vernacular of saying, look, I have a son, I have a child. I do have to have that talk about the relationships that he will fortunately go on to continue. But when he's confronted by police, we have to have that talk on what you do.
Sure. And what I would say is that, first and foremost, Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to this country. That is why he was, in fact, impeached at the top of 2020, which seems like an incredibly long time ago. But to your question about Black conservatives, listen, he has greatly inflated what he has done around HBCUs, and that, we all have Black sons on this panel. We are not relegated to specifically being connected with criminality. That again is kind of how Blackness has unfortunately been globally projected, in this nation and beyond, as related to Blackness and criminality. Remember one of the last topics from the last debate, it was race and violence in America, as though those are two things that are inherently together, they're meshed together, and that's not it. Black people have other concerns. We are entrepreneurs. Dr. Avis is a great example of that. She has, pushed and thrust people into entrepreneurship for many years, particularly this year included. When you think about that, we also are caregivers, right? You think about disproportionately how we and our children are being impacted by COVID. But then when you look at the community that makes up those people that are caring for people that are in ICUs, it is disproportionately Black and Brown people. I just mentioned climate a moment ago. We are definitely included in the climate conversation when you talk about environmental justice, to make sure that the communities that we live in, even if they are rural communities, because those are communities that we feel safest in, that we have land in that's been passed down to us, but that you have corporate companies who've been allowed to pollute the water, pollute the airs, and that then Black folks are disproportionately impacted by cancer and by asthma, as our children are. I believe it's 3 times that of white children. And the list goes on and on. We want great jobs. We're interested in manufacturing. There are a list and a host of things that Black people definitely would love to have conversations, and those conversations should be broadened, just not narrowed and relegated to race. So I would just say the conversation needs to be expanded. And when you're talking about a person who took out an ad on very prominent newspapers calling for the death penalty to come back, that 5 young children who have been since grown men and have been exonerated in Central Park, that he wanted them killed, that for me is all that you need to know about this person, and that conservatives would have much more to think about as it relates to, as he says, he's done the most for Black people since Abraham Lincoln. No, you haven't, bro.
Before I let you go, since we've talked about the Central Park case with 5 young men, as you know, Black men are very important to this election as well. But it's being revealed that some Black men, like Shaquille O'Neal and others, this is the first time that they're ever going out to vote. What would be your message, your urgent message to Black men, which former President Barack Obama is also doing? He's urging Black men to get out and vote. Why?
Because your future is on the line, because your ability to navigate society safely is on the line, because your ability to have any sort of ability to sort of rise up the economic ladder is on the line. And here's the thing I know. One thing I want to say is, though we know that the Black male sub-demographic of Black people have been targeted, and specifically by the right, for example, with a lot of misinformation and disingenuous information. The reality is most Black men do vote. I do want to acknowledge that. But I want to suggest those who may be wavering, those couch surfers, potentially, as Erica just alluded to, I want you to know that this is an important moment. This is probably the most critical presidential election that any of us will face in our lifetime. And though we're going to do everything we can to fight for you, it's nothing like fighting for yourself. And that means, in this context, beginning that process by the vote, but not letting that be the end of your political action. That just needs to be part of the process. But we do need you to show up and show out for yourself, your future, and your posterity.
Very good. Eric, a final word.
Yeah, I would I love what Dr. Ava said, and I echo and I lift that up, and to say that, one of the things that I say on the Savage Political Bite is information plus engagement equals power. We need you Black men to engage. right? We, definitely organize and rally around whenever, there are unjust shootings and things that definitely do impact our communities in a myriad of ways. We are stronger, in fact, together. And so when you think about, there's no amount of wealth that can be massed that will protect you from the court being positioned to really jump into state elections, to be able to say that null and void are what your state's constitution is. We are going to dig in and we are going to make a decision around that. There's nothing that can protect you from that. So this is a time that we actually, with 10 days left until November the 3rd, band together and really get this done. As Dr. Avis said, this is not a right now vote. This is a generational vote. We are looking down the pipeline of our children's children, and we want to be able to write ourselves individually and collectively into history to say that we were thinking about you and we made sure that we got it done.
I want to thank you both, Erica Savage Wilson and Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver. Appreciate you so much. Have a great weekend. And of course, I know you'll be challenging people to get out there and vote.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
And welcome back to the program. Joining me now is Timothy Allen Simon, who is the chairman of the board of directors of the California Black Chamber of Commerce. He's also an attorney who owns TAS Strategies. And you've done a lot of work extensively in politics there in California. When you looked at last night's debate, looking at it from both sides, what's your assessment of President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden?
Well, first I want to give my kudos to Kristen Welker. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Yes.
From MSNBC. I thought she did a superb job. Like the fly won the vice presidential debate, I think the mute button won last night's debate. I feel that Joe Biden did enough to maintain his lead. He was safe. He spoke to the people. He demonstrated leadership. He demonstrated empathy. Donald Trump's behavior was better than his last debate, but that was a very low bar to rise above. I still believe that his behavior patterns is catering to a certain base that gives him a pass. As he said, he could shoot somebody in Times Square. So I do feel that Vice President Biden did enough to maintain his lead. I think he had opportunities for a knockout punch, which we can maybe talk about more later, but he did enough to maintain his lead.
Well, let's talk about those opportunities that he had for a knockout punch. What were they, and why did he miss them?
That's a good question. One, I felt that when President Trump went after Hunter Biden, in evidence we call it when the door has been opened, and then you no longer can object to information coming in because you opened the door. I felt that when President Trump went after Vice President Biden's son, he opened the door to the activity and behavior of his family that's going on as we speak. The violation of the emoluments clause and other things that have been cited by media. I also feel on the tax return matter, this is maybe one of the longest audits in the history of our Treasury Department. And I felt that there was a moment for either satire or humor to say to the public, do you really believe this? And I feel that was an opportunity lost as well. What concerns me though, and as you know, energy is the area where I practice and I advise. And I do believe that the statements that Vice President Biden made regarding the oil patch states, as they are called, those that are producers of oil and gas, including California, by the way, I feel that he lost an opportunity to discuss decarbonization, which is the term used as to how we lower the CO2 output of existing energy infrastructure and some of the innovations that are coming forth in the fossil industry. President Barack Obama called it all the above. he recognized that in order to maintain our economy while at the same time grow an emerging clean energy market, that you had to have a balance of energy choices. I felt that the vice president showed a lack of competency in that area, and even maybe leaning towards the AOC New Green Deal. It reminded me of when at that time, presidential candidate Hillary Clinton said to the coal workers that basically you're done. Even though that might have been true, that's not the statement you want to make when you need those votes to win.
Wow, it's fascinating to hear your take on that. And as chairman of the board of directors for the California Black Chamber of Commerce, do you think what do you think about the president's statement in response to Kristen Welker's question about the racial divide in America, and Joe Biden's statement about how do you move Black America forward and become more inclusive and more diverse?
I think the president does not realize that his statement that I have done more for African America or Black America than anyone since, and he puts it arguably that maybe he's done more than Abraham Lincoln. I find that personally insulting without even doing a fact check. I think this notion of what I've done for you is something that is not well toned and well balanced. And arguably is just basically inaccurate. How you measure what presidents have done and have not done for African Americans is a matrix, by the way, because we are oftentimes embroiled in other policies that may not be identified as race policies, but still have a racial effect. Yeah. So I think the president is misguided by his advisors and how he's articulating that. In terms of Vice President Biden, and particularly in reference to the omnibus crime bill and the other bills that came out of Congress, I think Democrats need to come forward and explain in terms of the history of our country to many people that may not have that level of recollection, either by way of age or just all the events that have transpired, that our country was under siege and our neighborhoods were under siege by what was a crack epidemic. And clearly, it led to mass incarceration. Apologies need to be put forward, but people have to also understand that that drug epidemic, regardless of the cause, turned our communities into war zones. And actions were taken with unintended consequences to try to deal with that epidemic. Now, we now understand that it's about medical treatment. And I felt the vice president was very good in saying that these people should not be prosecuted. They should receive the medical attention that you, President Trump, have given to the opioid, those who are unfortunately addicted to opioid, a larger scale of the white community.
Let me take a break, and when we come back, I want to ask you about more specifically, beyond the debate, there's this election, there's local elections, but what do members of the Black business sector need to do to not only stay afloat, but to thrive throughout this pandemic and post-pandemic? Talking to Timothy Allen Simon, we'll talk to him again right after the break. So I'm talking to Timothy Allen Simon, who, of course, is part of our West Coast Connection here on the program. And Timothy, one of the things that comes to mind right now, we're short of 2 weeks of the election. And beyond the election, though, there's still this COVID-19 pandemic. There is still the disruption to our economy. From the California Black Chamber of Commerce perspective, what do entrepreneurs and business owners need to do to stay afloat and also to thrive and overcome in the midst of this pandemic? Is it possible?
First off, we have to push Congress to pass the HEROES Act and to make certain that there is sufficient funding of small businesses, and particularly African-American owned businesses, as well as governments. It's important to remind the public, and we all learned this in our macroeconomic studies, that government is the largest purchaser of goods and services. So when government has the funds to procure it benefits, and many of our business members procure with government. I think the other important factor is banking. And what the COVID epidemic showed in the first efforts under the PPP, that many businesses do not have the proper banking relationship. And that has a lot to do with the redlining, predatory, and other practices of the banking industry. Moving forward, there needs to be mechanisms in place. And I think FinTech, as it's called, the new technologies in financial services, provides an amazing opportunity for African-American businesses to have immediate access to that liquidity that will come out of the HEROES Act. But whatever is our next administration, and I believe it will be the Biden-Harris administration, that there's going to have to be an aggressive measure to make certain that our businesses do not miss out on whatever funding comes out of the act. In fact, in my honest view, that they are prioritized in the next funding round.
Well, here's the other side of the coin then, Timothy. Since you've been a Republican in the past, right now you're a free thinker. You don't aspire or actually go with any particular party. But from your Republican background, let's say Donald Trump wins the re-election. What do you do then? Who's in the room to remind him that he can't just talk about it, he's got to do it?
You know, the fascinating thing behind the whole Ice Cube controversy, when you read between the lines, were the people in Ice Cube's production and marketing and business structure who had relationships with the same people in the Trump administration, including Steve Bannon. And I think that's what we as a community have to understand. Business and politics make strange bedfellows. And I can assure you that there are relationships out there that many of our celebrities, our athletes, and our successful business people have that eat at the same table. And we have to stop, persecuting them and leveraging their access when the contrarian or our selection is not in office.
Timothy Allen Simon, always appreciate you, brother. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate you too.
Okay. We'll be back with more after this. And welcome back to the program. So I wanted to get more of an impact on what this election means to people. And I wanted to talk to a various group of people. So for this brief segment on how Black Americans are looking at this election, I have with me now Giovanna Hernandez Williams. Of course, she's been featured on this program talking about anti-human trafficking. We also have Joanna LeBlanc, who is a national security and foreign policy expert, as well as Nicole Lester. Nicole is the Executive Vice President of Black Ops Production and Distribution. It's a media strategy firm contributing to the New Age programming, quality content, editing, and diversity in media management. And Keith Gray joins me as well. Mr. Gray is an entrepreneur and 2014 candidate for Maryland State Delegate. He has over 18 years of law enforcement and private security and criminal justice expertise. And he's also a former professional basketball player playing in the European leagues. I'm delighted to have all of you on. Look, as you look across the landscape of this election, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, in the midst of the demand and the cry for racial justice, what are your feelings as we get so much closer now to Election Day and on the heels of last night's debate? Keith, since you're the only gentleman in the room right now, let me start with you.
I really think that our issues are being left literally on the table. I mean, that's why I wore the shirt today. I'll just start off with that. I've been an Ice Cube fan since I can remember. And this was the first guy that taught me basic civics lesson while I'm listening to his music bobbing my head. But I didn't know he was teaching me about the basic rules that we as Black people have to engage in with the government, so to speak. So it's evolved over time, and as his career has evolved. What he's doing right now, putting a plan forward. Number one, having the gall to put a plan forward. And with him being attacked left and right, this is something that is used to the controversy. But that type of leadership, bold leadership, is what we need to see from people who are, I don't care if they're entertainers, they're scientists, they're doctors. I've worked in academia for years. If whatever walk of life that we as a diaspora are from, especially in this country, Black Americans, we need to be displaying. We have the highest rates of COVID. I live here in Prince George County, for example. This is one of the wealthiest counties in America. So by default, probably one of the wealthiest counties in the world, but it has one of the highest rates of COVID cases in the state and also in the country. So it's one of the top for the Black. So you see these things where you have an economic, a democratically run county with economic problems, historical economic problems, by the way, in which our issues are not being engaged even here in the so-called, economic Wakanda of America, so to speak. I know it's fictitious, but this is as close as we're going to get. Something like this, where my next door neighbor is, he's a retired scientist with NASA. And, these are the neighbors that I have around here. These are the people that live in these areas, but we still have a lack in health, a huge health disparity gap, even in this county. So I can only imagine, you start to look at Flint, back where I'm from, Longview, Texas, terrible. Anywhere across America where we are pervasive in regards to the demographic, we have problems with the response. So just starting from a health, because I'm a health guy, health and safety guy first, starting from the health perspective, that is the number one thing behind economics that we need to be talking about and bringing to the table and pushing our issues. And again, that's why I wore the Ice Cube shirt today. So,
Gio, how about it? Where do you see the issues of this this election?
Again, thanks for having me, and I'm so glad to be a part of this panel. Well, as an Afro-Latina, I'm an immigrant. I just cannot deny my experience of coming to America and the reason and the purpose why I came to America. So, I stand firm on my principles, and I have to believe in a leader. I have to believe in his vision, and I have to trust what they say. So therefore, my decision is definitely solid and firm. And last night's debate didn't move anything for me. I look at past performance. I look at what's being told, and I compare with facts.
We'll be back with more after this. Nicole, how do you look at this election?
The same, I think. I agree with Gia. It's a matter of just, voting your heart and understanding that not with just this vote that you're going to be watching for someone to do something for you in this country, but be active. That's my appeal to everybody, is to be active, not just, I just think that we're making a big deal, and we always do, out of the presidential election, where, the local elections are the most important, because that's what affects you in your day to day. But because we're here and it's this whole competition and everybody's all riled up about police brutality and COVID and everything like that, we still do have to just choose the right candidate or the actual right team that's going to represent our interests. And then we have to hold them accountable and consistently be in communication with what our needs are, what our desires are, and never stop. So everybody's fighting really, really hard to get everybody out to the polls, but that fight should not end once we mark our ballots.
Yeah, it's kind of getting back to what Keith was talking about with regard to Ice Cube, that no matter who wins, keep the pressure on them. Don't let the foot off the pedal. Keep that pressure on them. Joanna LeBlanc, your assessment of what's going on with this election?
First and foremost, I think that this election, presidential election rather, is going to be based on two significant things. It will be the handling of the COVID-19 crisis, and two, race relations in America. While there's been a whole lot of conversations about the COVID crisis and steps that the country will take to move forward, but I don't think there was significant conversation about race relations in America. For example, the Senate released a report on the state of Black America. And when you read that report, to see home ownership, to see how low it is in comparison to white folks in this country. And as we know, one of the quickest ways to gain wealth is through home ownership. And when you look at the unemployment rate for people of color, when you look at the disparity in terms of pay gap and so forth, it is very disappointing. So I would have liked to see more of that conversation at the forefront. Now, I understand people of color only make up 12% of this population, roughly, but it is nonetheless a significant number of people who have historically been disfranchised through institutional policies. And second, the president talks about this criminal justice reform bill, which I think is great. But when you sit back and really analyze the judiciary, which is there to interpret the law, yes, you could have a progressive piece of legislation on the table, but judges are there to interpret the law, and you fill the courts with conservative judges. And as we know, conservative judges, we can always anticipate their ruling on certain matters. So I think it is very disingenuous, and I think the American people need to not just look at the laws that are being put forward in the United States Congress or at the White House, the executive orders and so forth. We need to look at the totality of the system. Look at the executive branch, what is happening. Look at the judiciary, and look at the United States Congress, because each play a significant role in your day-to-day life.
Very good. I want to thank all of you for weighing in on this important issue. We're just 2 weeks away now from the election, actually under 2 weeks. And certainly getting back to Nicole's point, all politics being local, a lot of people are concerned about what's happening on the local ballots as well. But I thank you both for, thank you all for weighing in on this. We've had Keith Gray, the Southern gentleman. I'm sorry I put you ahead of the ladies. And then we also had Nicole Lester, Joanna LeBlanc, and Giovanna Hernandez Williams. Thank you for weighing in on this important matter. We'll be back with more after this. And welcome back to the program. I want to thank all of the guests who appeared on tonight's show, and I especially want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out to watch. I do appreciate you. My final word is this. It was Dr. King who stated, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Hopefully, let's keep that in our minds about what we do to help each other so that we can be righted and ignited and united to keep spreading love, freedom, and peace. Good night, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Come on, all aboard. Let me break it down for you like this. The rhythm of love is easy to find if you're listening. The color of light isn't red, black, or white, but it's crimson. We all bleed the same. If you don't feel the groove, it's all right. Just give it time, give it time. Come on, y'all. Get on board. Mankind won't survive if our hearts beat inside a hateful rhythm. You see, love isn't bought, but comes with a price of forgiveness.